The howl pierced through the midnight silence, startling Sheriff Mike Thompson from his troubled sleep. It wasn't just any sound. It carried something hauntingly familiar, a desperate plea that seemed to reach into his soul and twist. The retired sheriff sat up in bed, his heart pounding against his chest as sweat beaded on his forehead. That sound. He knew that sound. Through the rain-splattered window, illuminated only by flashes of lightning, he could make out a dark figure at the edge of his property, a silhouette standing motionless in the downpour. "Not again," Mike whispered, reaching for the old revolver he kept in his nightstand, a habit from his days patrolling the county's most dangerous backroads. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the arthritis that had pushed him toward retirement as much as department policy had. The cabin's old generator sputtered as another lightning strike hit nearby, plunging Mike's world into complete darkness for 3 heartbeats before the backup system kicked in. In that brief moment of darkness, he heard scratching at the door. Desperate. Urgent. Dr. Eliza Morgan, the county psychologist who'd been helping Mike process his PTSD, had warned him about auditory hallucinations. "The mind plays tricks when we're processing trauma," she'd explained during their last session, her knowing eyes seeing right through his stoic facade. But this wasn't in his head. This was real. Mike grabbed his raincoat and switched on the porch light. What he saw next would change everything. 3 months earlier, Sheriff Mike Thompson had packed the last of his belongings into cardboard boxes, emptying the office that had been his second home for 23 years. The retirement watch felt heavy on his wrist, a constant reminder that after today, he would no longer serve the small town of Pine Ridge. "You sure you're ready for this, Mike?" Deputy Collins asked, leaning against the doorframe. At 32, Collins represented the department's future, bright, tech-savvy, and untested by the kind of horrors that had shaped Mike's career. Mike ran his hand over the barren desk, dust collecting on his fingertips. "Not sure anyone's ever ready," he admitted. "But my time's up." What he didn't say was how the silence of his empty cabin terrified him more than any armed standoff he'd faced. The nightmares from his final case still haunted his sleep. The doctor called it PTSD. Mike called it failure. "The town's planning a proper send-off at Riley's Tavern tonight," Collins said, trying to sound casual. "Mayor Wagner's idea. Even that reporter from the county paper. What's her name?" "Caroline Winters," Mike supplied automatically. He and the persistent journalist had developed a grudging respect over 2 decades of interviews, though she'd never quite forgiven him for stonewalling her during the Blackwater mine investigation 10 years ago. 15 miners had died, and the truth had never fully emerged. "The whole town wants to thank you properly," Collins pressed. Mike nodded distractedly, his eyes drawn to the worn patch on the wall where his father's badge had hung before him. 3 generations of Thompson men had worn the Pine Ridge star. The legacy ended with him. "Tell them I'll be there," he lied. The storm started like any other mountain tempest, wind howling through the pines, rain lashing against the windows. Mike sat in his living room, nursing a glass of whiskey as thunder rattled the cabin's foundations. That's when he heard it, a sound barely distinguishable from the storm's fury, a scratching at his door. Setting down his glass, Mike approached cautiously, years of law enforcement training still ingrained in his movements. Through the rain-streaked window, he could make out the outline of a dog, a German shepherd soaked to the bone, with something small huddled beneath her. "What the hell?" Mike muttered, reaching for the doorknob. The moment the door swung open, the dog backed away, a low growl rumbling from her throat. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face, and Mike's breath caught. "Sierra?" The last time Mike had seen K9 Officer Sierra, she'd been standing vigil beside Officer Reyes's flag-draped coffin, her disciplined posture betraying only the slightest tremor as the bagpipes played. Captain Harriet Martinez had tried to lead her away afterward, but the dog had whined so pitifully that even the hardened police captain had tears in her eyes. She's grieving, Dr. Wilson had explained to the assembled officers. Dogs experience loss differently than humans, but they feel it no less deeply. Now, this ghost from Mike's past stood before him, her training collar missing, her once pristine coat matted with mud and what looked disturbingly like dried blood. And beneath her, impossibly, a tiny puppy with matching markings peered out at Mike with Sierra's intelligent amber eyes. "Jesus Christ," Mike whispered, his mind racing. "What happened to you, girl?" The German shepherd's ears perked at the name, but her posture remained defensive. Beneath her, protected from the rain, was a tiny puppy, no more than a few weeks old. Sierra had been Pine Ridge's K-9 officer for 6 years, Mike's most loyal partner until her handler, Officer Reyes, was killed in the line of duty 3 months earlier. The department had planned to reassign her, but she'd disappeared the night after the funeral. Some suspected she'd gone looking for Reyes. Others believed she'd run off to die alone, as some old dogs do. Yet here she stood on Mike's porch, alive, but clearly wounded. Her once gleaming coat was matted and dirty. A fresh scar ran along her flank, and she favored her right front leg. "You remember Sam Reyes's cooking lessons?" Mike asked softly, thinking of the young officer's famous homemade treats that had made Sierra perform tricks even when off duty. "That boy loved you more than anything." The mention of her handler's name made Sierra's ears twitch. Slowly, Mike backed into the kitchen, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. From the refrigerator, he pulled leftover venison steak, a gift from Hank Patterson, the local hunting guide who'd insisted on keeping the sheriff fed despite Mike's retirement. "Your pup's beautiful," Mike continued, cutting the meat into small pieces. Reyes would have been proud. As Mike placed 2 bowls on the porch floor, maintaining a respectful distance, he noticed a glint of metal partially embedded in Sierra's collar, something that hadn't been standard issue. A small USB drive, protected by a waterproof case, hung beside her tags. The puppy, Nova, as Mike would come to call her, took tentative steps toward the food, her tiny legs wobbling. Sierra watched Mike intently, her intelligent eyes holding a message he couldn't yet decipher. Mike called his old friend Dr. Wilson, the local veterinarian, who made a house call to check on the pair. Wilson had served as the department's unofficial K-9 medical consultant for decades, having treated police dogs since Mike's father's time on the force. "She's been through a lot," Dr. Wilson said, after examining Sierra, his weathered face grave beneath his silver beard. "That gash on her side wasn't an accident. Someone came at her with a blade." Mike's jaw tightened. Who would do that to a police dog? "Someone who knew what she was," Dr. Wilson replied grimly. "The pup's about 6 weeks old, healthy, considering what they've been through." As Dr. Wilson packed his supplies, he gave Mike a sidelong glance. "You know, there's been talk around town. Detective Rodriguez from State Police was asking about Sierra last week at the diner. Said it was routine follow-up for the Reyes case files." Mike frowned. "Rodriguez? I thought she was transferred to the narcotics division after we closed the Whitaker case. Apparently she's back, and very interested in finding this dog." Wilson handed Mike a small bottle of antibiotics. 2 drops in the water bowl daily, for both of them. After the vet left, Mike examined the USB drive from Sierra's collar. His old laptop whirred to life, the screen casting a blue glow across the dim cabin. The drive contained a single encrypted file labeled Insurance. That evening, as Mike prepared dinner, a news alert flashed across his phone screen. "Prison break. Dominic Reyes's killer among 3 escapees." The knife clattered from Mike's hand onto the counter. James Kramer, the man responsible for Officer Reyes's death, the man Mike had arrested in his final case, had escaped custody during a prison transfer. Mike pulled his service weapon from the safe for the first time since retirement. As he cleaned and loaded it, Sierra watched from her corner, her eyes reflecting the firelight, Nova sleeping soundly against her side. Just a precaution, Mike told her, though the weight of the gun in his hands felt like slipping into an old, familiar glove. The memories came flooding back. The warehouse raid that had gone sideways, the desperate radio call from Reyes, the moment Mike had found his young officer bleeding out on the concrete floor while Sierra stood guard, already wounded but refusing to leave her partner. "We both failed him," Mike whispered, meeting Sierra's steady gaze. "But maybe we can make it right." Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by memories of his final case. The pursuit through the woods, the gunshots that had taken Reyes's life, the look in Kramer's eyes as Mike cuffed him. In the darkness, Mike could hear Sierra pacing, her nails clicking softly against the wooden floor. Dawn was breaking when Mike's phone rang. It was Collins. "Mike, we've got a situation." The deputy's voice was tense. "Kramer was spotted near Pine Ridge last night. And there's something else. Rodriguez from State is here asking questions about some evidence Reyes might have secured before he died." Mike's grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of evidence?" "Digital files. Something about the Blackwater mine case being connected to Kramer's drug operation. And Mike, she thinks Sierra might have been carrying something when she disappeared." After hanging up, Mike found Sierra standing alert by the window, her gaze fixed on the tree line bordering his property. Nova played at her feet, oblivious to the tension. "You knew, didn't you?" Mike asked, kneeling beside her. "That's why you came here." For the first time since her arrival, Sierra pressed her head against Mike's hand, a gesture of trust that made his throat tighten. The hours crept by. Rain began to fall again, drumming against the roof and windows, obscuring sounds from the woods beyond. Perhaps that's why they didn't hear the approach until it was too late. The first warning came from Sierra, a low, sustained growl that made the hair on Mike's neck stand on end. She rose to her feet, positioning herself between Nova and the front door. Mike reached for his weapon just as the window shattered. "Evening, Sheriff," came a voice from the darkness. Or should I say ex-sheriff? Through the jagged opening crawled a figure Mike had hoped never to see again. James Kramer, his prison jumpsuit exchanged for dark civilian clothes, his eyes just as cold as the day Mike had arrested him. Behind him, a second figure appeared, younger, nervous, clutching what looked like a semi-automatic weapon. "This is Daryl," Kramer introduced with mock politeness. "New friend I made inside. Turns out he's from Pine Ridge too. Remembers you arresting his brother back in 17. Daryl twitched, his finger too close to the trigger for Mike's comfort. "You ruined Tommy's life, sending him away for a simple possession charge." Mike kept his voice steady, his gaze flicking between the two intruders while maintaining awareness of Sierra's position. "Your brother was dealing fentanyl to high school kids, Daryl. Nothing simple about that." "Touching reunion," Kramer interrupted. "But we're here for something specific. The dog has something that belongs to me. USB drive. Reyes took files he shouldn't have before our little encounter." Sierra's growl deepened, her body tensed like a coiled spring. Nova had retreated to the kitchen, sensing danger through her mother's behavior. Mike slowly shifted his weight, positioning himself for what would come next. "You murdered a police officer, Kramer. Whatever you think you're getting from this, it won't end well." "That's where you're wrong, old man," Kramer sneered, raising a hunting knife. "I'd say things are about to end perfectly." Before Mike could respond, Sierra launched herself at the intruder with a ferocity that took both men by surprise. Teeth bared, she clamped onto Kramer's arm, driving him back against the wall. Kramer howled in pain, slashing wildly with the knife. "That damn dog!" he screamed. "Should have killed it when I had the chance!" Daryl panicked, firing wildly. The shot splintered wood near Mike's head as he dove for cover behind the heavy oak table that had been his grandfather's. From this position, he had a clear shot at Daryl's exposed side. "Drop the weapon, son," Mike commanded. his service pistol aimed with the steady precision of decades on the force. "You don't want to add assaulting an officer to your record?" "You ain't an officer no more," Daryl shouted, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. In the chaos, Mike positioned himself between the attackers and Nova, who had retreated to the corner, whimpering. Through the rain-soaked window came the distant sound of sirens. Collins must have activated the silent alarm Mike had installed after retirement. "It's over, Kramer," Mike declared, his service weapon aimed steadily. "Drop the knife." Sierra maintained her grip, blood staining her muzzle as Kramer struggled. In a desperate move, he kicked at the dog, catching her in the ribs. Sierra yelped, but didn't release him. "Call off your dog," Kramer demanded, his face contorted in pain. "She's not mine to call off," Mike replied calmly. "She's settling a score." Through the broken window, headlights illuminated the yard as Collins's patrol car skidded to a stop. Daryl, seeing the reinforcements, threw down his weapon and raised his hands. "You're making a mistake," he whimpered. "You don't know what he's got planned for this town." With one fluid motion, Mike closed the distance and disarmed Kramer, forcing him to the ground. The training of decades took over as he secured the fugitive's hands behind his back. Within the hour, Deputy Collins arrived with backup to take Kramer into custody. State Police Detective Rodriguez was with them, her sharp eyes immediately finding Sierra and the USB drive still attached to her collar. "I knew she'd come to you," Rodriguez said, kneeling beside Sierra, who had finally released Kramer but remained vigilant. "Smart dog." As they led the fugitive to the patrol car, Collins shook his head in amazement. "Sierra bringing him to you, that's one for the books." "It wasn't coincidence," Rodriguez explained, producing a laptop. Reyes was building a case connecting Kramer's drug operation to the Blackwater mine disaster. Evidence of criminal negligence, bribes to safety inspectors, all leading back to Maxwell Industries. Mike's breath caught. Nathan Maxwell was Pine Ridge's wealthiest resident, a third-generation coal magnate whose philanthropic contributions had funded everything from the hospital wing to the sheriff's department's equipment upgrades. "The night Reyes was killed," Rodriguez continued, "he wasn't just making a routine drug bust. He was retrieving final evidence from an informant inside Kramer's operation, evidence that proved Maxwell ordered the mine disaster covered up when workers threatened to expose unsafe conditions." The laptop screen showed surveillance footage of Nathan Maxwell meeting with Kramer months before the mine collapse. "Reyes must have suspected he was being watched," Rodriguez said. "He stored everything on this drive and somehow got it to Sierra before Kramer caught up with him." Mike stood in the doorway, watching Sierra nuzzle her puppy, the connection suddenly clear. She didn't run away to die. She ran to protect the evidence and her unborn pup. "The department will want her back now," Collins warned before leaving. "She's still technically active duty." Mike nodded silently, his hand resting on Sierra's head, knowing that this revelation was just the beginning. 6 months later, Mike stood on his porch, watching as Sierra and Nova raced across the yard, their coats gleaming in the summer sunshine. The cabin had changed. New paint, repaired steps, a fenced yard that gave the dogs room to play while keeping them safe. Mike had changed too. The nightmares came less frequently now. His days had purpose again, training Nova, who showed the same intelligence and focus as her mother, volunteering at the department to help train their new K-9 recruits, rebuilding his life with 2 unexpected companions at his side. "Coffee?" asked a voice behind him. Dr. Eliza Morgan handed him a steaming mug as she joined him on the porch, her presence a weekend ritual now. Their professional relationship had evolved into something more personal after the Kramer incident, her insights into his trauma helping him heal in ways he hadn't thought possible. "Nathan Maxwell's sentencing is today," she reminded him. "Are you going?" Mike nodded, watching Sierra teach Nova to follow a scent trail, a natural talent the puppy had inherited from her mother. "Rodriguez asked me to be there. For Reyes, for the miners' families." The state's case against Maxwell Industries had blown open after Sierra's evidence came to light. 15 families would finally see justice for their loved ones lost in the Blackwater disaster. Officer Reyes would be posthumously decorated for his investigative work. Sheriff Rodriguez, promoted after the previous sheriff's connection to Maxwell was exposed, had asked Mike to consider returning as a training officer. The thought no longer filled him with dread. Sierra slowed her pace to let Nova catch her, the younger dog's delighted bark echoing through the trees. Then both turned toward Mike, racing back to where he waited. "Good girls!" he called, kneeling to receive their enthusiastic greeting. As Sierra pressed against him, Mike noticed once again how the white star marking on her chest perfectly matched the one on Nova. 2 bright stars that had found him in his darkest hour. "We saved each other," he murmured, embracing them both, as Eliza smiled fondly at the trio. "That's what family does." The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard as the 4 of them headed inside, not just to a cabin, but to a home that had found its heart again. Sierra paused at the threshold, her amber eyes meeting Mike's in that knowing way that still amazed him. She had come to him that stormy night, not just seeking shelter, but offering redemption. For her puppy, for herself, for the town of Pine Ridge, and most of all, for a retired sheriff who thought his best days were behind him. This brings us to the end of this story. Thank you for watching till the end. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't hesitate to like the video and share it with your friends too. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell for more fascinating stories. Have a nice day.